Welcome, listeners. I am excited, and I know you will be too, because I have Michelle Kniess, an attorney who works in both Minnesota and Wisconsin. She has been on a while back, almost a year ago. And I was telling Michelle before we came on, she's one of my top 5. So she's fun to listen to. And what we're going to be talking about today is spousal maintenance. So if you are looking into a divorce or starting to go through the process and have questions about how spousal maintenance works, you're like tuned into the right episode. So what I want to do is I'm just going to kind of let Michelle, she's really got a heart for what she does. And what I love about Michelle is she always is positive. You have a positive outlook. And I don't know if you know that comes off, but I know that you like to work together if you can. And you're like a great representative and advisor for people who can't work together. But so Michelle, would you mind just sharing your story about why you have a heart for doing divorce and what led you to do this?
Sure, absolutely. I started my law career doing business litigation at a firm in downtown Minneapolis. And that, while it was fine, it wasn't super fulfilling. I had an opportunity to volunteer at the Volunteer Lawyers Network, and I did a divorce for a guy who had been separated from his wife for several years. I think we found her in Nevada. But he just wanted the paperwork done, right? He just needed this simple divorce. And so I did that and got it done for him. And it was insane. He called me afterwards and was just, he was so grateful. And I've never experienced that outpour from a client before. And so after that, I ended up getting a position with a family law firm on the east side of Minnesota. And I was there for several years and then moved to another firm and then had my own practice for a really long time. And now I'm in a practice at Hellmuth and Johnson. And we're building quite the practice group at this point. We're up to 6 attorneys. So it's
Wow.
exciting. Yeah. But I also have my own personal side to it too, because I ended up going through my own divorce at one point with 2 kids and, a new house and a new law firm. And it was eye-opening. It sort of gave me a whole new perspective of what my clients go through. And I already knew what to expect.
Right.
And so the emotion that I had going through it, knowing knowing what was going to happen, that was pretty intense. And it just gave me a whole new appreciation for what my clients go through when they have no clue what's about to happen.
Right.
And that sort of changed how I approached them or how I advised them, because I had a soft spot for that anxiety that comes with
The empathy. I mean, you knew it, you felt it. I'm sure. And what I love about what you said too is that kind of what sparked you wanting to do this was that someone was so grateful that you got them to the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And that is always my thing. I want to help my clients so that beyond this, they can look back and be so thankful that they did it and they've come out on the other side. Because Michelle, I don't know a lot of people that aren't thankful. They're not, the growth and even when it's hard and a fight, when you finally get through it, there's relief and gratitude. And so I love that even though we kind of do different things, we kind of work parallel, kind of the same. So I love that. And so now I just want to talk to you about when I have clients who come to me, I have both of them come together because I'm not advising either of them. I'm just I'm their mediator.
Yeah.
And when we're going to talk about spousal maintenance and they're working together, they're usually caring for each other, but it's still a hot spot. So what we generally do is we go through and we go through their asset spreadsheet first and kind of figure out how that's going to play out. It all kind of rolls together though.
Yeah.
And then I go through and I have them do their budgets. And a lot of people haven't done this yet, and it's painful, but you do. I feel like that's so important for you to understand what your expenses are and what they're going to be if you move out. And so we look at that, and then we look at their net incomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and there's other factors playing, like, was this a long-term marriage? Did this person support you throughout it? So those are in the back of my mind. But basically, we go through the budgets and we go through the net income, and then we go, okay, so wife has this much money and she needs $1,000 more to be able to pay her expenses for the month. And then we look at him and we go, okay, he's got $2,000 extra each month. So he could afford. So we look at what he can afford at the same time as what she needs. And we kind of move around from there. It gets tricky when there isn't enough for both ways, you know what I mean? And then we really have to look at their budget. They have to change things. So that's kind of a long, explanation of how we do it at my practice. How does it work when you're with one person and you're trying to decide what they're going to need for maintenance?
Right. Well, I think this starts out with this understanding that these parties were married and at one point had a plan, right? They had an arrangement, whether they were both working, whether somebody was going to stay home with the children, or support somebody's career. I've seen it where one spouse moves around a lot for their job in order to move up in the ranks, and the other spouse just commits to being stay at home because it's too hard for two people to find new jobs all the time.
Yep.
And so when then your marriage is ending and you're finding yourself in this position where you're gonna have to be separate and no longer follow this plan, we have to kind of take a look at what are the resources and what are the needs. I mean, that's about as basic as I can put it. And it's a very emotional topic for parties, whether you're on the receiving side or the paying side,
Mhm.
honestly. I've had plenty of people on the receiving side who will say, I deserve this. He left or she left, that sort of thing. I've also had people who've said, you know what, I can do this on my own. I don't want to have to take anything more. And they kind of have that
Yep.
approach to it. But I think when we start to assess, what are the needs and what are the resources, we have to start with this threshold question of, should there be maintenance at all? And part of that assessment comes from looking at, what was the plan here? Was there a plan for, early retirement? Was, they're going to be eventually two incomes when the kids are out of school? What was their family plan? Because in order to come up with, sort of what was a reasonable amount, we do look at the standard of living that they established during the marriage. And part of that is their plan. Now, Minnesota and Wisconsin are slightly different in how they approach maintenance. Minnesota is much more, what was the standard of living established during the marriage, and then can that be replicated into households with the income resources going forward? Wisconsin, I think, takes a little bit more of a partnership approach, I would say. Their maintenance awards are usually a little more robust than Minnesota. But I think they both start kind of from the same assumption that there was a plan and it's broken now, and we have to come up with a new plan under new circumstances. So, when I'm looking at creating a budget, let's say I'm sitting with somebody who's going to be seeking maintenance. I usually have them make, three. One is what was the standard of living during the marriage? So can you replicate for me what your life looked like from a financial standpoint on a monthly basis, so we can see sort of the lifestyle that we're hoping to achieve? And then I will have them make a budget of what are your expenses right now, immediately. I mean, are you in an apartment? Are you paying your own car payment? Because I want to be able to negotiate some assistance with the here and now, right? We call it the temporary maintenance, and that's temporary meaning during the proceeding, not after.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and then I have them make a forward-looking budget. What's realistic? Go research apartments and rents. Go
Right.
research what not life insurance, medical insurance would cost you, and have something put together that's supportable, and well researched, and really defensible. And between them looking at these three, you can kind of come up with this concept of what's the proper number in terms of need. But then kind of the second step of that analysis is what's available.
Right.
And that is the income piece, right? And that takes a while to kind of flush out and see what are we using? What are we looking at? Is it just earned income? Is it investment income? Sometimes, spouses are not required to use property to meet their monthly living expenses.
Right.
But we have had some recent cases in Minnesota that have recently said that gifts received after divorce can be considered in looking at, maybe a modification of maintenance. So, things are always changing there. But, at the end of the day, I think we're trying to really piece together a new plan out of what broke the first time, right?
Right.
We're still sitting with the same resources and needs, but how can we repurpose this into something that works in two households?
I have a question. So I'm wondering, and if you can, looking at Minnesota and Wisconsin, and I think it's probably dependent on how long people were married.
Mm-hmm.
Are you finding, because I do sometimes try to kind of coach people who are needing maintenance to what's your plan for the future?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what if this is just temporary? Because a lot of times it's not going to go all the way to retirement.
Right.
And so, I've worked with people where they're like, yeah, I'm going back to school. I want maintenance for 6 months after the date of my graduation. And that's kind of how we figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
But I was kind of under the assumption, especially in Minnesota, that they like to see that you're going to do something to increase your income, because is it kind of an expectation that both of you are working?
I think the courts will look at earning capacity. So all of these factors that you mentioned kind of play into that analysis. One being, how long has this marriage lasted? That certainly plays a role. The longer the marriage, I think sometimes the longer the maintenance. But really, it's, is the spouse seeking maintenance able to be self-supporting at some point at a standard of living that's somewhat commensurate with the standard of living that was established during the marriage? So they call it temporary maintenance or rehabilitative maintenance.
Yeah.
And the duration of that a lot of times is linked to what's the plan. Again, back to the plan. Are they wanting to go back to school and then get reemployment in something that will earn them more money than what they're making now or capable of earning now? And then maybe we advocate for a duration of maintenance that matches that time frame.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we have people who are working right now, but if they just worked a little bit longer, they're going to get promoted, or and then we can have maybe a step up in amount, or step down, I should say, in amount. But the courts are going to, I expect, I would say, somebody seeking maintenance to help themselves to the extent that they
Yes.
can. I have seen some people where, the family plan was, let's just say one spouse was going to stay home with the kids and the other spouse was going to work. Well, now they're getting a divorce. That's not going to happen anymore. If the spouse seeking maintenance is 35 and, has some history of employment, or even if they don't, I think at that age, the court will expect them, assuming they're healthy and able-bodied, the court will expect them to go out and find employment at some point at a time that makes sense for the family. I tell clients who are obligors or potential obligors to maintenance, the spouse seeking maintenance can do what they want to with their life, frankly. I mean, if they don't want to work, they don't have to, but at some point, the law won't make it your problem. And so the court at some point will assume that there's going to be a level of income being earned or that should be earned that would perhaps end the maintenance award or reduce it. So, yeah, I do think there is an expectation for somebody to sort of work at self-help, to become self-supporting if
Right.
they're going to be requesting maintenance.
And so this helps me so much. So it's kind of earning capacity and standard of living. So what comes to my mind is like if you have one person who's in a career where they make substantially less and they've been married a long time, and this other person has their own business and they're just raking in the dough. And this person over here, maybe it's a long-term marriage, isn't really, that's their career. That's what they love to do. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have to up their income. It means that here's your standard of living. Let's try to match that. So I love that is making a clearer picture of maintenance for me. Now I wanted to ask, my clients always ask me about this too. So when does maintenance end? Is it automatic that if the other spouse gets remarried, or if they're living with someone as if they're remarried, or does that have to be in their paperwork, or what is your legal information on that?
Sure. Well, as with anything I say to people, it depends, right? It's always fact specific, and you can always find an exception to any rule. But, I think there's a lot of factors that go into the duration of maintenance. And Minnesota and Wisconsin, again, are slightly different, but a lot the same. I think generally speaking, just longer term marriages oftentimes will result in longer term awards, or what we call permanent or indefinite awards. That term permanent sounds kind of ominous, but it really just means indefinite. And oftentimes a permanent maintenance award will go until the obligor retires. Now, when that is to occur is also subject to negotiation or litigation, right? Should they retire, or can they retire early? Are they obligated to stay till 67? I've litigated those cases, and the outcomes are all over the board. But in any case, maintenance will end at the death of either party or the remarriage of the person who's receiving it, unless there's an agreement to the contrary. When it comes to the temporary maintenance, like we said before, shorter term marriages are often this way, or even longer term marriages where one spouse has a lot ahead of them, right? They're young, they have time to rehabilitate, retrain, get new education, and get out and I'll just say mitigate, right? We're trying to bring more income into this pool for this family that's now in two separate households. And so that kind of maintenance, it's kind of all over the board of when it stops.
Okay, can I ask a question, because I hear this a lot? So what if someone is not going to get married because they're getting maintenance and they don't want that to end, but they're living with someone, sharing expenses? What happens then?
I see that all the time. And it's a really difficult thing to kind of work through sometimes, because again, there's so many factors that go into it. And Minnesota made an attempt a while back to codify some case law that tried to explore this situation. And I don't know that the statute necessarily made it any clearer, but somebody who wants to change maintenance because the other spouse, the one receiving the maintenance, is living with a boyfriend or a girlfriend, they have to show, number one, that there's cohabitation and some factors surrounding that. But then number two, that makes the present award unreasonable and unfair.
Okay.
So as part of this analysis, we have to look at, or a court has to look at, whether the person receiving maintenance is going to marry the cohabitant.
Okay.
That's a tough thing to prove, right? All they have to say is no, right? I mean, what does
Right.
that look like? You have to look at what's the economic benefit the obligee derives from this relationship. Well, how do you measure that? The person who's living with them is likely not under court jurisdiction to, necessarily easily give up their income information and tax returns, and it's hard to kind of figure out what's changed with the budget due to this. And of course, everybody says the person who moved in doesn't pay rent.
Right.
Um, that's just what they do. I mean, um, and then we have to look at, well, how long do we think they're going to live together? That's another piece to this. I mean, it almost feels like you're looking at fault divorce again,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
abolished a long time ago. So you're examining this relationship and trying to make all sorts of crystal ball predictions about it, when you really have no idea what's going to happen there. And one thing that's really important about cohabitation is there is no legal obligation attached to that for the person living with the obligee spouse to support that person. So
Right.
if the court comes in, let's say obligor brings a motion to modify or cease maintenance, let's say, because the obligee is living with the significant other. If the court says, you know what, you've met your burden, we're gonna end maintenance. Well, if the obligee breaks up with his or her significant other, that's it. You can't come back and get maintenance started again. It's done. And that's
Right.
dangerous in some respects because there's no legal obligation to dating somebody, unlike a
Right.
marriage, right? And that's why there is a big distinction in between cohabitation as a reason to change maintenance or remarriage, because remarriage laws attach, right? And
Right.
then there's a new person to kind of step into the shoes of the obligor. It should that marriage deteriorate and end. I
So
have.
you no,
I was just gonna say I have seen courts when approached with a request to end maintenance due to cohabitation. If it's a pretty obvious case of cohabitation and that they're really just not getting married because they don't want to lose the maintenance award, the court oftentimes will reserve maintenance or hold it open. So I've seen where the court will say, you know what, I'm just going to suspend it. That way,
okay.
there is still a way to come back if that relationship, fails to thrive and they break up, then we can come back to court and ask for maintenance to start again. And at least there's still that option if it's reserved versus terminated.
That totally makes sense. And this is kind of leading to the last question that I had for you. When parties set up maintenance, can they make the decision when they're going through it to um, not have the court, not give the court the ability to come back in and change it? Do they have that? I think in Minnesota, it's called the Karen waiver. And in
Yep.
Wisconsin, I think there's some language too, but can you talk about that just a little bit before we go?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of when I talk to my clients, I always say there's three things you have to talk about with maintenance. It's amount, duration, and modifiability. Um,
Yep.
there's a lot of factors that go into figuring out maintenance and a lot of assumptions and predictions that have to go into that calculation. And that includes, is the obligor spouse going to maintain employment? Are they going to get raises and promotions? We don't necessarily want the obligee spouse to share in the future, right? Perhaps because it's not a profit sharing plan. On the other hand, what if, somebody becomes unable to work or something drastic changes there? So, are you still there?
I am, and I think we had a little glitch. Can you hear me?
I can now, yeah. Your screen's frozen, but I can hear you.
Michelle, can you hear me?
I can. Can you hear me?
Michelle, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Okay.
It's a little glitchy.
It's frozen, but it looks like it's still going. So, okay, now I don't know. I've never had this happen, quite honestly,
Yeah.
but that's okay.
Yeah.
Yes, I can now, and the screen is frozen. But why don't you start talking? I'll watch and make sure it's timing about maintenance, and I can cut this.
Sure.
I mean, about the Karen
Modifiability.
waiver.
Yeah.
Like,
do you want me to pick up where I left
so
off?
you said, is it?
You're cutting in and out.
Otherwise, I can end it and I can just talk about. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can.
Are you hearing me okay now?
Yeah, it's in and out. It's kind of weird.
Michelle?
Yep. Like I'll hear you really clear for about a second and then it cuts out. Do you want to message me? That might be easier.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Now you're coming in. Okay. So, yes. So, okay, I will know to start at. All right, Michelle.
Yep.
Let's stop.
Okay.
And do you want to end it and try to come back in?
Yeah, let's end it and try to come back in.
Another link quick in the connect.
Yeah. Yes.
I don't have. I'll see what